Welcome back. Much to the disappointment of married couples who are struggling through self-isolation right now, there is no recipe for a perfect marriage. But with his new Audible original podcast, How Not to Bleep Up Your Marriage Too Bad, author Stephen Marche tries to get us as close as possible to that perfect marriage. So he joins us today to tell us all about it. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Welcome back to the show. Your new series, it explores the realities of modern marriage. And you begin by talking about whether or not people should even get married in the first place. Lifestyles are changing. So is marriage relevant anymore?
Well, the funny thing is that it's kind of more relevant than ever. I mean, just simply because, when you get married now, the person that you marry is your sexual partner, they're your financial partner, they're your best friend, and the person you're raising your kids with. So even though lifestyles have changed and, marriage is no longer sort of the ticket you need to get into adulthood, it kind of matters even more now than it ever did before.
So, Stephen, in each episode, you take a deep dive into one particular question. For example, how do we live together, or how do we stop fighting? All these questions are really relevant. So which one did you find that couples avoid asking the most?
Well, money. I mean, the one about money was really amazing because you have all these couples who've been together for sometimes 20, 30 years who really don't know anything about the financial life of their partners. I mean, one of the experts we talked to, they in their research, they said that 7% of married couples have secret wills. So imagine waking up and your partner has a different plan for the money at the end. There's a whole lot of secrecy around money in marriage, way more than I thought. Like, people just do not talk about it.
A secret will? Now I'm wondering if my husband has a secret will. Okay,
7%.
Here's something that that's so crazy.
I know.
Okay. Let's talk about something else that people may be reluctant to discuss, despite Cynthia Loyst telling us that we should talk about it more, and that is sex. For a lot of people, that is an uncomfortable subject, even though many people probably have some kind of insecurity around it. And you set out to find like the magic number of times to have sex for couples, like on a weekly basis or whatever. And it surprised you what the answer was. What is the answer? Just give us the number.
I even found out. That's the crazy thing. I mean, sometimes you have to ask these questions just to see if there is an answer, right? And the research shows that couples who have sex once, if you have sex with your partner once a week, that is the equivalent in terms of happiness of going from earning $25,000 a year to making $75,000 a year. So I don't know about you, but that was probably the greatest leap in happiness in my whole life, was going from $25,000 to $75,000 a year. So, the other thing is marriages are such black boxes. Like, no one really knows what's going on in other people's marriages. And so, I had this sort of pop culture impression that married couples were, having sex like 3 times a week or something like that. Like, no, that's not the reality at all. If you can get to once a week, you're golden.
I feel like self-isolation will change that data even further, but that's for another topic.
Sure.
Not only do you explore the realities of marriage in this series, but finding a partner as well in the first place is something you also explore. And you speak to engineers, anthropologists, you speak to biologists on this subject. So tell us, is it easier or harder to find a partner today?
Well, I don't know if it's easier or harder. I mean, I think it's always really, really hard. I think when the standards are so high, when you're looking for this person that you can be sexually compatible with, you can raise your children with, that there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked to find a partner. And that's why, you get these people like, this NASA engineer who works at the Jet Propulsion Lab, whose ordinary day job is planning missions to the moons of Jupiter, trying to work out an algorithm to tell you whether you should marry someone, and finding it basically, extremely, extremely difficult to tell. So, it's always been a problem. The algorithm, the computer dating, which of course is now going to be basically all dating, doesn't make it any easier.
I think that one of the goals of this series is to help couples stay together, build healthier marriages. And yet you include an episode on divorce.
Yeah, well, half of marriages end in divorce. And, like we come out, like obviously this is a show for people who don't want to get divorced, right? But you should remember that divorce is one of the most wonderful parts of living in modernity. Like it is as important as free speech and as important as democracy because, it means that our relationships are not forced on us. They're something that we choose to be part of. And that's a really sacred thing. So, I would say that what we learned is that people tend to get divorced for about as bad reasons as they get married, they really don't think it through. And, nearly half of people who divorce find that they regret the decision when they're standing in court actually going through with it. So, with COVID, like the divorce numbers are going to go way up. Like they've done it everywhere in the world where this is hit. Just do it slowly. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm just saying like think it through before it happens. You want to take your time making that decision.
So, Stephen, you explore modern marriage in all of its forms, which includes there's a growing trend that we've talked about on the show before, which is non-monogamy or being monogamish. I think a lot of people largely misunderstand this. What did you sort of discover around this?
Well, the thing that I found so fascinating is that everyone has these different standards of what faithfulness is, and everyone believes their version of faithfulness is absolute truth, and it doesn't really apply. So there are people out there, we interview them, who think that their partner watching pornography is cheating, which to me is sort of like, well, then every single person in human history has been a cheater of some kind or another. For others, like when we talk to sort of middle-aged swingers, like we went to a sex club in downtown Toronto, and they really have they don't allow emotional commitments, but basically physically anything goes. Then when you talk to the sort of polyamorous community of like younger people, particularly millennials, they actually don't even worry about emotional commitments. So, it's a real mess. Nobody really knows what's going on. Everyone has their own standard. And it's just fascinating to see that those standards are not, logical. There's no real standard. It's just what you feel.
You get people on the series to get vulnerable about marriage and really have raw and open conversations with each other while you're there about how their marriage is going and how it might not be going so well. What was it like for you to be present during such intimate, private moments?
Well, people were very generous with us. People really confessed a lot of very intimate stuff. We got to see people fighting in very, very painful ways. But, we did this is a sequel to our first series, not how not to bleep up your kids. People really don't want to talk about their kids. It's really hard to get people to talk about their kids, but people absolutely love to complain about their marriages. That's like a favorite human sport, I think. So yeah, getting these stories of like people fighting was, it was incredibly generous of them to give, but you could also tell that they really wanted to share it. Like they really wanted to give that information because marriage is really a lot harder. I mean, what I learned is that marriage is a lot harder than I thought. It's not a natural thing. It's very hard to make it work.
You yourself have been in a marriage for almost 20 years. So was there anything that you learned and thought, I'm going to apply that to my relationship through doing this podcast?
Well, the sex tip is pretty good. I thought that was a pretty impressive thing to learn. I'm glad I know that. But, I would say the thing about, when we talk to the people who are the experts on fighting, they really, like neurobiologists and particularly these people who do lifetime studies of health and relationships, like fighting is really pointless. Like it's a physiological response to stimuli, and it has to do with intimacy itself, with being rammed up against this other person and sort of feeling stuck. And when you fight, it's not an intellectual process. You never, and this makes sense from experience, right? You never get to the end of a fight and think, well, that's all solved. So I think I really learned that like when you get like fighting is really pointless. Like you need to get out of it and calm yourself down as quickly as possible and the phrase they use is get to safety. And then from that, you can have real conversations about issues. But I think learning that fighting is totally pointless, that was really helpful because when you're in these fights, you're like, well, this is not going to resolve anything.
Well, I'm going to have to live with that, Stephen, because I am a fighter. So thank you for the advice. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your podcast. It's called How Not to Bleep Up Your Marriage Too Bad. It premieres June 11th on Audible.ca, and it will be free for a month until July 11th. We'll be right back.